Next, I want to welcome our colleagues from Western Carolina. Western Carolina is an institution, one of our leaders in really taking this framework and running with it. They call their dissertation a disquisition. They do group dissertations, they use improvement science, they have social justice, and they have a faculty who are 4 of them here who travel and work together and really think through this work. Kofi, Lomotey, and Jess Weiler in the last year or so have taken on this notion of rigor and what does that mean in the EdD. I like to think of that as one of those nasty little words with 5 letters that shouldn't be repeated. It takes us back to the PhD, right? This notion of rigor. You say it and people go into a PhD frame, but yet it's necessary. So we've been trying over the years to think about why, how, what is that different in an EdD? What is rigor in EdD? And Jess and Kofi have taken that on with a little bit of research. They've done exchange breakouts, workshops, and so I invited them to come to this convening to really lead us all in that discussion. So I'd like to welcome Kofi Lomotey and Jess Weiler to come on up.
So let me tell you a little bit about where we are. Anyone here know where Asheville, North Carolina is? Beer City, right? It's a great place, although it's getting crowded quick. So what you see on the top there is the city of Asheville. It's in the western part of North Carolina, about 3.5, 4 hours west of Raleigh-Durham. And then down below is Cullowhee. That's where our actual physical campus is. However, the doctoral program and the master's program operates out of Asheville. We have an instructional site there.
First of all, our program is a hybrid program that students come to class once a month, Friday evening and all day Saturday, and then the remaining instruction and interaction is handled online between classes. Our average cohort is about 20 students. We just admitted our 7th cohort in our re-engineered program, which I'll talk about in a minute. We have, as you've heard earlier, something that we call a disquisition. Actually, a disquisition is, the word disquisition is just a synonym for dissertation, but we've redefined it to address the notion of working with improvement science to address a problem in one's own work environment. So in fact, we discourage individuals from enrolling in our program who are not in some type of a leadership role, because we want them to identify a challenge or a problem in their work environment that they can address along with their disquisition committee, which is made up of one of our leadership faculty, one of our research faculty, another faculty member at large from the university, and then a 4th person who is a practitioner in the student's workplace, usually their supervisor or somebody who's working with on a regular basis. And those of you who have worked with doctoral students certainly know the value of having your supervisor working with you on your culminating product that helps you deal with all the bureaucracies within the institution. Our EdD program actually started in 1994. It was a traditional PhD type EdD program. In 2011, we ceased admission into that program and spent 2 years re-engineering the program. We became aware of CPED and decided to design the program as a CPED type program. One of the unique things about our re-engineering process is that we had a campus-wide committee involved in that re-engineering. We had a representation from the Dean of Education, Dean of Education's office, from the Provost's office, from the Dean of the Graduate School's office. And the value of that is that when we began to do the unique kinds of things that we all do within our EdD programs, we didn't have any pushback from the administration because they knew from the beginning what it was we were attempting to do. And we've had their support for the most part ever since then. Let me stop. There are a number of concerns on our campus with within the College of Education and Allied Professions and across the university about the nature of this re-engineered program, despite the fact that we had representation from all over the campus. And many of you have also heard these concerns about the EdD program. Historically, the concern has been whether or not it's a PhD light, or if in fact it has the same type of quality or rigor as a traditional PhD program. So those are some of the concerns that have come up on our campus and across the country on many of the campuses where you were. That was one of the things that encouraged us to propose a session on rigor here at CPED a few years ago, and we've been doing that session for the last couple of years. And so that's the origin of this discussion today. We want to emphasize in today's discussion that our focus is on rigor as a level of challenge. When we think of rigor, we think of the challenging experiences that students have in the classroom, in writing the culminating activity, in interacting with their colleagues, and interacting with their faculty members. We're talking about the notion of challenge, of this being a challenging process, as opposed to focusing on the traditional notion, perhaps in a PhD program, of quality.
Okay, so why do we even care about having rigorous EdD programs? In our discussions and in our presentations and in some of the research that some of the feedback we got from other EdD directors, that if you have a rigorous program, you're likely to increase your student applicant pool, right? Folks want rigorous programs. And then the greater your applicant pool, then you're in a position to have high quality students, right? Increases community and employer support, assists in faculty recruitment. Faculty want to come to programs that are rigorous. Increases the university's support for your program and its sustainability. It helps satisfy accreditation bodies, supports consortium or other association membership, increases your competitiveness for grants, and maybe the most important, that rigorous EdD programs are tied to strong student outcomes, which is why we're all here, right?
Let me just add, let's go back to it for a second. Let me just add, when we talk about increasing the student applicant pool, certainly there's a value in increasing the pool because you have more applicants to select from. But in addition to that, it increases the pool of highly qualified students in terms of individuals who are aware of what it is you're trying to do. And similarly, when you look at the third item, assisting in faculty recruitment, again, we want large numbers of faculty applicants to apply for our positions, but we also want top quality faculty members. So what is the problem that we're addressing? There are three aspects to it. The first is the whole notion of the nature of rigor. What is the nature of rigor? What is the meaning of rigor? And then finally, dealing with the notion of claims of inadequacy. Our claims of program rigor are inadequately substantiated, underestimated, and or unclear. So those are the kinds of things, those are the issues that we want to try to address as we deal with this notion of rigor in practitioner-oriented doctoral programs.
So just a brief background, how do we presently conceptualize this notion of rigor in the field of education and academia? We've talked about it a lot, and it's in the literature with respect to how we think about things and higher order thinking and rigor in the curriculum and rigor in the coursework. I think we're all familiar with Bloom's taxonomy, and in many ways are trying to pull that into our individual coursework. Rigor, these are some definitions that have been put forward. It occurs when working with students to better understand content that is complex, ambiguous, provocative, and personally or emotionally challenging. It doesn't just mean harder work. We're challenging students to think in different ways, and we're going to talk a little bit more about how WCU attempts to do that. And then in traditional dissertations, we know it to be a term that relates to the research, right? Are the research tools appropriate for addressing the research questions, meeting the goals of the study? This is how we sort of talk about rigor, no rigor, and we're suggesting we need to go a little bit further.
When Jess and I began looking at this issue of rigor a number of years ago, we started to look at the research, what the research was saying about rigor within EdD programs. And to our surprise, there was in fact quite a bit that had already been written at that time, and that people continued to write in terms of the nature of rigor within EdD programs. With regard to EdD programs, the research says that EdD programs are useful, and EdD work is important, but that we need more of it. They also talk about the notion of it being less rigorous. And these are some of the scholars who have written on that topic. In terms of the curriculum, they say that there's a limited use of high-quality research methodologies, limited focus on know-how, practical know-how, and a limited focus on the benchmarks that many of us have within our programs, proposals, the actual dissertation and disquisition, and qualifying exams, and other things. And again, the researchers who have done this work are listed there. In addition to looking at what other researchers have done over the years, Jess and I also developed our own study looking at not only CPED programs, but UCEA programs in terms of how those programs look at the notion of rigor. And a couple of things came out of that. First of all, we all believe that our programs are rigorous. No surprise there. And then you see here how across CPED and UCEA programs, how we look at rigor within our programs. What is it that makes our programs rigorous? Addressing the problems of practice in the real world. The number of research courses that we have is really interesting. In my own doctoral program that I was in, on the campus there was an EdD and a PhD program. And the only distinction was that there were more research courses in the PhD program.
Okay, so now I want you to talk to each other.
So, when you see the little sunshine icon, that's me. We want you to spend some time, most of you are with your groups, and even if you're sitting with the university other than who you work with, we want you to spend some time talking about how your program is rigorous and how you might define rigor for your programs. All right? Spend a few moments speaking about that. You can jot some notes down if you choose to, or just have a conversation.
I think what's interesting, how many of you had to try to define rigor before you could even answer this question? Like, what does this mean? We were having this discussion up here, right? Yeah.
And realizing we're all individually and collectively and with our organizations at different steps in the journey, right? So that is okay. But I'd like for folks who would like to share out, we don't want to take a whole lot of time on this, but we do want to hear some key points of anyone who would like to share to answer this question. Our program is rigorous because. Who would like to share out? Someone's volunteering up here, over here.
Probably better not stand up, Catherine.
Good luck. Say exactly what you said.
Okay, so we started out basically talking about what rigor meant. And when we looked at the definition, it looked really harsh. And then Jackie over here made the distinction that it actually, in the design, our program is extremely rigorous. It's strict. It adheres to certain design qualities. I mean, it's rigorous, but in the delivery, it is not. So the rigor comes in the design and not in the delivery.
I love that. Rigor is in the design and not in the delivery.
Well, I jotted down 3 things. And one thing we talked about is that theory and philosophy, because it challenges our students. Thinking about what Ella said earlier about rigor having to do with challenge. And then also turning problems of practice into researchable problems is challenging and I think rigorous. And then providing meaning in our communities, make sure the research provides meaning for not just our students, but for the communities and the students in our communities.
Right. Now, in a little bit, we're actually going to speak to the problems of practice and making them researchable, actionable items.
We had an interesting discussion, interaction at the table about a number of hours. One thing that I felt made our program more rigorous is that we've been in the process of moving from a light PhD model of 60 hours to a stronger CPED model. And in that process, it really involved a lot of discussion by the intensive study areas, which is where the majority of the cut came. What was the purpose of the intensive study area? Besides the professional core that all students take, we have a single EDD, not 3 separate EDDs. So in our intensive study areas, it was the focus for moving forward and discussing and working on their problem or possibility of study. And we moved from a 60-hour to a 48-hour through a lot of discussion about where is duplication and what are those 5 different courses that we'd like our students to take in an intensive study area. So from my standpoint, it was really making this program much stronger, much more cohesive, and had a running purpose from the beginning, which is what a lot of us have been talking about, starting with looking at problems of study, problems, issues, and practice. But one of the concerns was that when you lose that many hours, you're losing rigor in the program. I don't know if I see that, but I can see where people would think that you're losing courses.
I can see that people would think that. I would argue it's wrong thinking, but yes. Because we would argue that hours doesn't equate to rigor, right?
So at our table, we considered that notion of challenge again and focused initially on the scaffolding nature of our coursework so that research courses, our students start with program evaluation because we want them to know that they've been doing research in their jobs. And we move them from there through a series of research courses where they then apply what they're learning. How do you write a problem statement? How do you write a purpose statement? Using the standard Creswell text. But they do it conceptually, but then they apply it to the interest they have in their problem of practice. So it's very live and very real throughout the 9 quarters. The second thing we talked about around challenge was our particular program is a quarter-based program. So challenge and rigor in itself was this notion of 2 courses per quarter, 4 quarters per year, with breaks of 1.5 to 2.5 weeks only between those sessions. And one of our colleagues at another institution talked about within their research courses, they co-teach, co-deliver, and collaborate. And that added an element of rigor in that while one takes primary grading responsibility, the other also does do a review of that. So the students have 2 points of view. The work is aligned across 2 people, and they work together and learn to appreciate each other collaboratively.
Thank you. Any last, we need to move on because there is more, but I need somebody who's just going to die if you cannot share this right now with this group. Oh, and hands went down. All right, here we go.
I don't know if I'm gonna die, but we talked about something, I think a little bit different in terms of the growth mindset, and that we all feel like our programs are rigorous because students come in feeling like they know the answers, and then we're working hard with them to allow them to be inquiry-based and be asking more questions and thinking they have answers, and also having the developing change agency towards work and social justice, and that for them, that the whole piece around equity and justice is a huge change for them. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Robert. Good to see you. So I've been listening to the responses, and the responses at our table were really, really good. But it sounded some of it sounded similar to any program that would be rigorous to me, because maybe we've worked in other programs as well. So what we want to do is challenge you to speak with your people one more time, but instead we want you to open up the workbook that was in the packet on page. And it has the CPED working principles. And what we want you to do now is to consider rigor through that lens with this mapped on top of it. So basically, what you've already done, but now you're adding another layer of the working principles. And how do the CPED working principles ratchet up the level of rigor in your program? Maybe not even really consider them. So let's take a little time, look through. Should have it in your package, page 4, guiding principles.
And one of the things we learned in a past presentation is that when you start being real intentional about becoming a CPED member, that maybe your definition of rigor changes or expands. So think about the conversation you just had, and then if you are committing yourself to these principles, how does that change, or maybe it doesn't change, your program's concept of rigor? So that's fair.
So we were saying that two-way street, like one of my colleagues over there, she teaches leadership courses and brings the research questions into her leadership courses. Talks about positionality, where we are compared to others. And it's really interesting that the leadership people would bring in the research questions, which I've always thought that was the other way around, that the research people were struggling to figure out how we can use improvement science research to move people from social justice issues. So I thought that was really interesting. Who else wanted to? Raise your hand. I'm going to pick people.
Thank you. In our group, we were talking about maybe we needed a set of criteria. Maybe the guiding principles and the design concepts, rather than trying to always satisfy the PhD requirements, which, by the way, are very limited. You check these 5 methodology or 10 methodology boxes off, and can you write a journal article? Okay, and that's, by the way, that's nasty, but if you think about it, I think that we have much to say about social justice, about applying things, about principles 4, 5, 6 in particular, and maybe designing our own criteria by which we define rigor and by which we prepare students to deal with real problems in education, not IES designed experiments.
More work. Who else?
Good morning. One thing we've tried to do in our program over the last 2 years is to use the guiding principles to develop a portfolio that students would choose items from coursework, but also how they're applying it in their jobs, and that's where the rigor comes in. So how do you use your philosophy of education in your job? How do you look at social justice issues, foundations issues, research questions? We've also we're trying to pair courses together to address what you said, Robert, about it's not research courses in isolation and leadership courses or cognitive courses in isolation. It's working together to refine problems of practice and research questions and how to do that. The challenge becomes working with the students to put the things in the portfolio. Do they match the criteria? Because we use the guiding principles and they have to enter them every semester. So it's outside of coursework. It's replacing comprehensive exams, but it does ratchet up the rigor because we're asking them to apply things in every course, and faculty have to change their courses to say, oh, I'm moving from a theoretical model to a more conceptual and application-based. So it's going to be fun.
It's optimistic. Anybody?
So in continuation of that, I think that you need to look at the outcome of the students and how successful they are in implementing their intervention within the organization, you know, the leadership that they provided to make that happen, and the impact that it's had on their organization, the community at large.
Yeah.
You were planted, because it's going to just work beautifully. So, continuing this, there's lots of trails and hiking in Nashville, so that's why we chose this sort of backdrop for you. But we want to tell you a little bit about our journey, thinking that this might have some influence on yours, give you some ideas. Okay, so before we came up with our notion, our concept, we talked about what was behind it, which was two guiding beliefs. One, we believe practical research methodologies and models, for example, improvement science, in EdD programs require a rethinking of traditional conceptions of rigor and necessitate a new definition. These are new processes. This is a new approach. We believe EdD program rigor should be intricately connected to the achievement of challenging student learning outcomes. The achievement of challenging student learning outcomes serves as evidence of program rigor. We believe strongly that student learning outcomes should drive our concept of rigor. We should always be connecting to our learning outcomes for students. Well, why would we do that? Those receiving doctoral degrees, and this is across fields in our opinion, are charged with solving complex and challenging problems in our society. They must be able to face and resolve challenge in order to lead transformative organizational and societal change. Watch out, you get dizzy here.
I just wanted to comment on this briefly. We believe practical research methodologies and models in EdD programs require a rethinking of traditional conceptions of rigor and necessitate a new definition. By traditionally, what we're talking about is basically PhDs. And, you know, this should not be counterintuitive because education is not the only field that has both practitioner degrees and research degrees. That is, degrees that are designed for people who want to be practitioners in the field and degrees for people who want to be professors or researchers. The same exists in public health. It exists in medicine. It exists in business. And so this notion of having to rethink, having to have new conceptions of rigor is not novel because it exists in every field. And in fact, historically, it's only the field of education where we have not appropriately distinguished the practitioner degree from the research degree.
do you want to share Western's? This is our grounding concept of rigor.
When we think about what is a rigorous EdD program, we think about the notion of disrupting and transforming institutions with a focus on social justice. In other words, it's not just transforming and re-engineering for the purpose of doing that, but it's for the purpose of bringing about a more just and equitable institution and ultimately a more just and equitable society. And we do this through encouraging a higher level of thinking, higher level of understanding, creative thinking, and a social justice thrust or upheaval of society. This is serious business that we're talking about.
And I want to add to that. I think that when I came into the program, equity and social justice, trying to achieve equitable and socially just outcomes was a piece of what we did. It is now across our faculty agreed this is the work we do. There is no other work. This is the work.
Jess is being kind to her colleagues who were with us when we first arrived 5 or 6 years ago, because we had a slide presentation for one of our orientations for new students, and the last slide was, we support social justice. And nobody said anything about the slide, it just went, and that was the end of the slide presentation. There was no focus on social justice.
We're really good at talking about it, not necessarily operationalizing, right? And so we have made this commitment collectively, which is transforming how we do things in our principal prep program, and we'll talk about that. Okay, so we're asking you, and we think this is maybe the most important exercise that you do. Are your students prepared to disrupt their present systems, the status quo, to achieve socially just outcomes? And what does your program do to build student capacity to disrupt? And be honest. Don't say they're prepared to disrupt if you don't think they are. And maybe the fact that we're doing that doesn't mean you want to do that. But we are engaging in that work. And we are trying to create leaders who are ready to disrupt the system. There's nothing more rigorous than that. Frankly, I'm done with the system, but
we won't get to that. So yes, the first question is kind of a yes/no, which leads to a how, and then the term positionality came up already. But what how are you leading your students to bring forth the marginalized voices, to achieve equitable outcomes for minority students? In our context, it's going to look different in every context, right? For your setting. And we have, from students of color, Latinos, LGBTQ, where Western Carolina sits, we also sit on indigenous lands, Cherokee. And so some of our students focus on, we have multiple foci. So I'm going to be quiet and ask you to think about this, or are we perpetuating the status quo among our educational leaders? we acknowledge the time we have, and as we're sharing a lot of information, we're needing you all to come to this conversation with where you are in this journey, right? And we are all at very, very different stages in this journey, right? I'm sure from those who applauded at the beginning when we first mentioned social justice to, you know, some perhaps at the other end of the spectrum. Even when we use terms like positionality, you know, I don't want to make an assumption that everyone here in this room knows or understands what that term means, or you may have read it but not truly grasped it, for example. Those and many others. So as we have this conversation, we'll be kind and understanding of each other, and realize we're coming to this from our own journeys, but knowing that we and y'all, we are in the mountains of North Carolina, all right? So we're not we're all over the national news with how horrible our state laws are, right? With regards to anything progressive, right? So, but for our program, so I'm saying that because for our program to sometimes strength comes out of necessity, right? Because if you're in other places where you can be more comfortable, it's maybe not as necessary. But inequities exist in every single organization, pre-K to doctoral, and we need to look at those inequities and the systems in place that create those inequities, and how we continue to feed those inequities, even if we represent a certain subgroup or minority group ourselves, right? That's all I'll say about that for now. What we'd like to do is ask you all to go back to these questions and talk about how, and we can share more as well, but how you ask or encourage and teach and guide and support and grow your aspiring leaders or your current leaders who are getting their doctorates to disrupt or challenge the status quo in their organizations.
I'm going to interrupt for a second. Before you do that, just out of curiosity, if you think your EdD program sufficiently prepares students to disrupt the status quo of those or of their organizations, stand up. Just had a feeling that was going to happen, right? Because we're all on this journey. We've got a long year. I want to hear from them. Oh, good. Good. We've got a long to hear from you all and learn what you're doing. So let's address the first one and the second one together, whatever you want to bring in. I want to hear from you on this one.
Who wants to speak?
So in our program of study at Barry University, we have a participatory action research course. So going back to decisionality, as you know, that is a main core element in that course. And we always tell students that it's all about challenging the status quo. And if we're going to change society, it's all about asking those questions. And of course, we go into, pedagogy of the oppressed and Friday, and this builds throughout the program of study. Thank you.
Like that participatory action. If you all would say your name and institution, that would help us too. Maybe someone would want to reach out and learn more from what you're saying.
Good morning, my name is Karen Card, and I'm at the University of South Dakota. This is our third year in CPED, so we're still in the infancy stage. But one of the things that happened in this process is we generally have about 23 people applying to our program, and we accepted 23 people. But this year, and over the last 2 years, we dropped the GRE, but we put a lot of weight on their purpose statement and how it aligned with our CPED goals. So we had 43 people apply, and we accepted 12. And when we looked at the 12 at the end, they were very different. They were much more diverse, much more women, people that probably wouldn't have got accepted if we looked at the traditional way we have been accepting people. So we're hoping by having different groups in the classroom that we can pull at that effort, but it started with the admissions.
Thank you.
Eugene Fujimura, Cal State Fullerton. Just a couple things that come to my mind are, in our qualifying exam, our students have to answer a specific question about what they do to, in their workplaces to foster just, equitable, inclusive educations in their workplace. And so that's a real concrete part of what they need to do. And then we're pretty intentional in our cohort model and the readings that they have to engage in to have really active discussions about JE, just, equitable, inclusive education in the classroom also, and that I think that helps foster this ability to disrupt as well.
Thank you. I don't know how much I'm going to be able to kneel, so I'm sorry if I'm blocking anyone's view. Who else?
Hi, my name is Christina. My name is Christina Yao, and I'm at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. I think one question that's not up there that's really important that we all really have to think about is how are we prepared to support our students, right? I mean, we talk a lot about like disruption, we talk a lot about systems, status quo, about social justice, but does everybody in here have an answer or a definition for that? Maybe individually we do, but I think my assumption is programmatically, departmentally, and as an institution, how do we do this if we're not prepared for that? Have we identified our own biases? Have we identified, like where we are within the system? Because we are, right? And the fact that we are encouraging students to enroll in these programs, and no matter what, within academia, it was created as a common structure. It's a way to get people to work toward the status quo. So I think we need to really think about and really question who are we, what are we doing, and talking about being disruptive, being committed to social justice, we have to really operationalize that and think about how we're really doing it and how we're doing it in a way that's right and responsible.
Great points. I can, in super short, one thing that we find, going back to, I think what Kofi spoke to, about being intentional about the faculty that you hire into your department and having the relationships among your faculty. We put it in it's a shame we're missing a few faculty here, so you could see us in our entirety. But we push each other, we challenge each other, but we do it with the foundation of love and respect. But you gotta be tough to be on our faculty because we are going to push each other and continue to peel back layers of our own biases. We do that individually and we do that collectively.
Let me pick up on that point. Let me pick up on that point for a minute. One of the things that we're very excited about in Western Carolina is that we like each other. I actually like Rob. We're all, when we have searches for faculty, we're all not necessarily on the search committee, although this time I think we are just about on it, but we're all intricately involved in the search process because we're looking for somebody that will fit on our team, somebody who is interested in the kinds of things that we're doing. We also, we meet at least once a month, sometimes more often, and we discuss all aspects of our program. We also, our students take leadership courses as well as research courses, but they take them simultaneously. So when they come to class on a Friday night and all day Saturday, they're meeting with a research faculty member and a leadership faculty member for that entire period. And if Robert and I are teaching a course, teaching 2 courses together, and it's his turn to do a mini lecture, I don't run out of the room and look at my text messages or anything like that. I'm involved in what he's doing. He's involved in what I'm doing. And in fact, depending upon the nature of the courses, you might have, one time we had Robert and I were teaching 2 courses together, and we had a final exam that was the same final exam for both courses, because the courses were that intricately involved. So my point is that these kinds of things are challenging and difficult, but they become a lot easier if you intentionally develop a group of faculty members. Jess and I have been in our program for the longest, and this is our 6th year. We're the quote-unquote senior faculty members in our program, and we've been intricately involved in bringing other people on campus. And we like that, and that really matters, is being able to do these kinds of things that we're talking about. We've all grown in terms of our understanding and commitment to social justice. We practice it in our interactions with each other, we practice it in our interactions with students, and with our cohorts, students work toward being more equitable and being more socially just because of that way of thinking, way of looking at the world that we've laid out for them.
I want to thank you for bringing up this topic, because it's got me thinking that in a way that I haven't sat down and thought before. But the idea of preparing our students to be disruptive, and going on what you said is, well, where am I prepared to be disruptive in a conscious way? And it was brought up at our table of using the term positive disruptor, which I still have to think about, because you can disrupt things just to, and having defining what is the issue, or what is something that you're trying to disrupt, because there's so many things that are going on in our society that I do get angry and upset about today, and I need to prepare my students to be able to focus on certain aspects of a system that they want to disrupt. So that whole idea of preparing, and is there positive ways to go about it? Is there steps? Is there things within myself that I need to look at, so I'm not just disrupting to shake things up, but there's a goal that I have in mind. So thank you for bringing up of my own preparation, faculty preparation, so that I'm preparing students in a successful way as well.
And we all acknowledge that there's no end point to our preparation. We're going to be preparing till the very last day. You don't ever arrive when it comes to issues of equity and social justice. You don't get it and arrive there. You're just, your personal identity and our organizational identity is changing and growing, and sometimes going backwards and sometimes going forwards, right?
But we guide our students through the use of improvement science, and Robert is 100 times more adept at speaking to that than I am, probably 1,000 times. But through improvement science, you can guide students how to disrupt in, I hear what you're saying, in proactive ways. We're not playing 52-card pickup with educational organizations, right? Yes.
I'm Claudette Peterson from North Dakota State University, and I appreciated your comment about nudging our fellow faculty. We have recently added land acknowledgement statements to our syllabi, which in North Dakota is very important. But because I tend to have the Muslim advisees, when they finally decide what the starting date and time is for Ramadan, I send an email to my colleagues telling them that. And I check sunset every day, because even if, we teach late afternoon, 4 till 10 at night, like probably many of you do. I don't care if it's 20 minutes before class ends. I have a timer and we take a break at sunset. And although we encourage our students to bring dinner to class when Ramadan begins, I point out that they should be mindful of their classmates who may have not even had a drink of water all day. So that's a little bit of disruption in the normal classroom schedule, but I think it helps make them conscious about it in a city where we have a lot of new Americans who were refugees, and I know there are issues in workplaces about the prayer times during the day. So I try to model a way of just incorporating those important times so that the students start to think about it.
Some of these programs who think that they're moving forward, we'd love to hear from you about what you're doing. And then Heidi, there's one way up in the front when you're done. I'm going to give you a workout.
I can use it. Steve Mitchell from Kent State University in Northeast Ohio. In our program design, the CPED principles have really been helpful in giving us a roadmap, albeit we have suggested that there is a landing point in terms of the ways in which we seek to instill this notion of disruption of the status quo. It does give us a roadmap, something that we can help our students follow. And we've been quite intentional in course design and the design of learning experiences to build the CPED principles into those, so that those principles are reinforced throughout the program, and learning experiences are such that within their own context, and the context of course really matters, within their own context, students are encouraged to think about the problems that they experience and the ways in which those problems are related to the CPED principles and the potential solutions to those. So for us, the answer to question number 2 up there is really all in the nature of the learning experiences and the course design that has gone into our program.
Thank you.
In fact, I got another mic, so close yours off.
All right, well, let me get this gentleman back here, and then we'll go up there, and then go on.
Thank you. Following up on about the last 10 minutes worth of conversation, one thing I wanted to share is that a general point and then a specific strategy that we've developed. Sheldon Monson from Central Connecticut State University. Fair. I think we don't always attach this language to what we're talking about, but one of the things we found to be true is that explicitly talking with folks, both students and faculty, about removing yourself from the equation, taking your ego out of the equation and really thinking about the perspectives and experiences of others and actually structuring experiences so you can do that work is critical in moving along this continuum so you can step out of that box of individualism that so much of us live and exist in all the time. And in our program, we believe that creating spaces for co-creation, collaboration, collectivist action, multi-stakeholder input is really critical. One of the things that we did very recently, which we're pretty astounded with the outcomes from actually, is for our comprehensive portfolio experience that our students put together. We instituted a complete deprivatization of practice approach to it. And as the students were putting their portfolios together, from every step along the way, from word 1 to final product, all of their work, which went through a very intensive editing and revising process, was posted on a shared Google Drive folder. And everyone was looking at their growth along this journey, along the way, contributing input, learning from each other, and you could really see that in the final products. And it really teaches to us that we saw the most powerful transformative impacts that we feel like we've seen so far with students. And the lesson for us on our end was that it was turn it over to them, let them talk to each other, let them share what they're doing and learn from each other, and build their answers for themselves rather than coming from us.
Parents. You want to turn yours off, Heidi?
So I'm Langston from Duke University, and I want to acknowledge my colleague down there, Dr. Rick McCall from Duke University. Now, we have spent a lot of time in the design of the program, and as Kofi says, we like each other in our department. Because one thing I always charged the search committee when they look somebody, I said, the top 2 candidates have credentials that say they're smart, so any 2 can do the job. The question is, do you want to see the person on Monday morning when you come to work? The answer is no, don't hire them. But beyond that, the courses is what we are intentional in design. So we have things like, for instance, educational social justice, educational policy and practice, and looks again at the impact of social justice, educational policy and politics, then we have educational law and ethics. So what we have done is, in each of the courses, specifically designed for the program, we have woven things like equity and social justice and accountability. Also, the tagline for the department when we send an email out is, working across boundaries, aspiring towards social justice, when you could never achieve it. So what we have done is build a culture. As students come in, we fit into this culture to say, you know something, everything we do is focused towards issues of equity, social justice. So even as you learn the theories and the data analysis, we don't teach methods for quantitative research. We teach data analysis for improvement. So the language you use in framing the courses is critical to change the way we think about the program. Also, like you, we had buy-in from our former dean. We've met with administration, we got buy-in from administration. So therefore, that allowed us to do a number of innovative things in the program. But each person in the department, teachers of the program, meet once a month like you as a steering committee. And the 3 I think this year we had a retreat again to review the entire program. So what you're doing, you're always building. You never really, I think you'll be successful because the students are going out and we honor the achievements of the alumni and bring them back to meet the current students. So there's something we're doing to create the impact and some sort of disruption, but disruption really is what you do in your own backyard, and other people look and say, wow, this is really working. Because I don't think you always have the authority to really change it, you want to change the institution. But then again, strategically, you have a mentoring system, so each person has a mentor in their place of work. And then allows you freedom and flexibility to do much more than you can do if you just go on your own with your credentials.
So I want to hear from, it's doing weird things, more of you, but I want to talk about what we're doing and then tie that into what you're doing. I don't know why it's doing weird things. Go ahead, Bob. Thanks for this.
I just want to comment briefly on this whole discussion of social justice. You know, the whole idea of social justice is relatively new in education, but it's like proliferated all over the place. Everybody's writing on social justice, everybody's talking about social justice. But the reality is that in the year 2019, there is still many of us who are very uncomfortable with this notion of social justice. In fact, I'm sure there are people in this room who are uncomfortable with it, and perhaps people who don't even think it's necessary. But I would argue that the reality is that we continue in 2019 to live in a society, indeed in a world, where people continue to be discriminated against based upon the color of their skin, the amount of money they have in the bank, their gender, their religion, their sexual orientation, their beauty, their height, their weight. And until that changes, we believe that we all have a responsibility as faculty members, as students, as citizens of this society and of this world, to do something about it.
Okay, so we're going to tell you about what West Western's doing, and then we want you to tell us what you think about that.
Like Jess, can you hear me? Like Jess mentioned earlier about the program outcomes leading, giving us a roadmap to go forward. These are our two major driving core outcomes. And as you can see, the practice, leadership practice is up front, in forefront. Number two is that they're going through with rigorous scholarship. And that kind of, this slide, she made it, but I just kind of interpreted that this is what we used to think rigor was number two, right? That really, to me, is what a PhD program looks like. But then you have to look at number one, and then that's the big driving principle for us.
So we believe, and we don't think it's necessary for an EdD program to be more rigorous than a PhD program. It's not a competition. It's an apples to oranges type comparison that should not happen. But we do believe EdD programs are more rigorous, in particular ours, because we don't just want an academic analysis of things. We are asking our students, you need to go into your context, you need to develop a design team, you need to do a causal analysis of a problem that exists, you need to design an evidence-based improvement initiative that's going to address not only a problem of practice, but for us, an issue of equity and social justice. And then you need to write the paper and analyze how that improvement process went. And so that is, in our opinion, a very rigorous demand and process for them to undergo, and do it in 3 years, right? There's the sunshine.
And so we encourage, and Robert, I'd like for you to speak a little bit more, help me out with this one too, that we encourage that students to look and examine inequities in their practice and in their organizations that are often caused by the organization. And many of us who are in education, we were good at it, or we survived it, or we navigated it, right? We were successful. The system worked for us in some ways, right? And so then we have to acknowledge our own complicit actions, right? And me, 27 years in K-12, right? Before moving into academia, right? I have a lot to own there. I have a lot as I'm, teaching leaders, I have a lot to uncover about what I did to perpetuate inequities in the schools that I led. That's deep. But I want you to talk a little, we haven't talked about root causal analysis.
We're going to get there.
We are? Yeah. It's all this process in academia and in K-12, we just kind of get to it more.
You were just playing.
All right.
So when we think about rigor, we talk about rigor at Western, we believe that we provide rigorous coursework that provides a strong theoretical and critical understanding. What you see in the orange boxes is related to scholarly practice, and purple boxes, circles. What you see in the purple circle is related to leadership for equity and social justice. These are just examples that I put here. These aren't the only texts that we use. These are very challenging texts, especially within our context, where we are, like Kofi said, in the mountains of North Carolina, and asking people to understand things that they've never had to think about, many of them before. And even in urban areas where maybe there are more progressive thinking on a regular basis, these texts are challenging.
So, and if you can't, some of you maybe can't read them or zoom in enough, but organizational theory for equity and diversity, that's Colleen Capper. CAPPER.
The University of Wisconsin-Madison.
White fragility is Robin D'Angelo, DIANGELO.
And the coursework, we do traditional research methods as well as methods related to improvement science and practice. And the book on the bottom down there is Dr. Crow's book, and he brought little inserts to, if any of you are interested, I'm sure he'd love to talk about his book. But he also teaches an improvement science course, and we are still relying on the Learning to Improve text as well. These aren't our only ones, these are just examples. Kofi.
Practical tools that we use on our campus include equity audits, which we encourage students to understand and to employ in their own workplaces, their own laboratories. We also include critical autobiographies that our students do in our social justice and education course, which is a very telling experience for students. We, as faculty members, whoever's teaching the course, and several of us teach it from time to time, the faculty members will do critical autobiographies first to give students an idea of what it's like, and then the students present their own critical autobiographies that are very useful in terms of them understanding the things that we've talked about in the course, such as their own positionality within society and power relationships amongst the groups and so forth and so on. All of those things come into play as students share their own critical autobiographies. And then, can you all see the list? Equity audits, critical autobiographies, equity PD plan, identity development inventories, ICS for equity, we mentioned Colin Kaplan earlier, fishbone diagrams. This is your opportunity to talk about course analysis.
Hello. One of the things that I was thinking of that somebody said about self inside the research process. That's why I like improvement science so much, because it has a set of frameworks that you can work with your mouth taped shut almost. I call it working with your duct tape, mouth duct taped. And so because these students think that they already know the answers to these problems, when they go out and do this work with the fishbone diagrams and drivers and all that, it leaves them out of it. It leaves their ideas out of it. So they may sit with 4 or 5 different groups of people they're collaborating with inside the project, but it leaves their own influence out of it, which I like.
I want to add something to that. Kofi and I were talking about this earlier. We feel strongly that we're getting better and better at developing leaders who can indeed disrupt their systems. But what's happening when they get out of our program and they go back into these systems and they're hitting tremendous amounts of resistance, right? When we start to talk about Theo Harris's work and others. And so we are talking about how our work shouldn't end at the time that they are done, right? One example of how we're trying to work not only with students, but with their organizations. So one example, in a K-12 example, we have Asheville City Schools is trying to implement systems change for equity, and they're using the ICS framework and serving as critical friends for them in how disruption happens, at the same time preparing their leaders. Then it's not just prepare your leaders, pat them on the head, and I really hope this works out for you. But figuring out ways, which is a whole other presentation, I think, on how we can then, once they're going out there to do that disruption, support them in that work. That's the hard part, right? I think there's a real trajectory toward, okay, I've got these tools, I'm ready to go, and they get out there and they say, but I don't want to lose my job, so I'm just gonna that stuff I learned about the status quo and what I need to do over here, and go over here and work on bus schedules or do the budget or whatever. Just kind of leave that here. So how do we keep them motivated, willing, and moving forward to do that and supported in doing that work? Right? That's a greater challenge for sure.
We encourage our students. In fact, we had orientation for our 7th cohort last week, and we encourage them to begin thinking about a problem practice that they can utilize in their disposition. And the reason for that is that we have designed all of our coursework, the research courses, the electives, and the leadership courses, to help them to better understand the problem that they've identified, and to ultimately help them better understand how to intervene to address that problem. So these are some of the tools that we utilize in most, if not all, of our courses, and that we attempt to encourage students to better understand, ultimately to utilize in their own disposition work, and then ultimately to utilize them as they attempt beyond graduation to identify and address problems or challenges that exist within their laboratory of practice, within their workplace. And another piece of this is what we call coaching, that occurs with faculty coaching students and with organizational leaders coaching students, organizational leaders including our students' peers. Because we discourage students from being in our program if they're not in a leadership role. I think I mentioned that earlier. And so they all have leadership experience that they share with each other. The peer group, the cohort model, as many of you know, is extremely valuable if we take advantage of that opportunity. And so they have an opportunity to be coached, if you will, by the disposition committee external member, by the disposition chair, by the internship mentors, if they're looking toward a superintendency or principalship. Disposition, the design team, we require them to have a design team in their workplace that works with them to design the intervention that they're going to implement within their workplace. Of course, the entire WC faculty in education, leadership, and in research, and also as I mentioned, their cohort members. All of these individuals work together to coach our students to do a much better job in terms of their disposition and in their understanding of problems as they exist within their workplace.
So we would love to have your thoughts and feedback about how we're conceptualizing rigor. We'd like any more ideas on how you are preparing your leaders to, in fact, disrupt and transform. So I think the more ideas we can give. I think a lot of great things were shared in this past discussion that we had, but I didn't hear much concrete. I didn't hear many examples of how exactly are we preparing them to disrupt. What are our concrete examples? I don't think a conceptual understanding of critical theory and epistemology is enough. That's important, right? What are we doing? And how are we helping them to understand that you're gonna get quite a bit of resistance? And how are you gonna push through that resistance, and how are we supporting that? So anything that you're doing, I think, would be helpful in not only helping us to learn each other. Anyone?
One of the things that I've done, and it's not concrete, but I wanted to go back to someone's statement over there about the third question, is how do we become disruptors? And it's really I think of Maslow and self-actualizing. It takes a while to get up there, but then I realized I am a revolutionary, even though I don't look like it. I am one. I'm an activist. All of us are activists in this organization. This is an activist organization. And for me to realize that I'm a revolutionary and my students are revolutionaries. Our 5th cohort calls themselves the revolutionaries. They have pencils printed up, the revolutionaries. And just the idea that, to be honest with us ourselves, we are activists. And to recognize that in your own identity took a while for me to do, but then I realized it, and I go with it. I own it. I'm a revolutionary, baby.
All right, who can contribute as we come to a close?
I'll try. I'm Stacy Sachel. I'm at the University of Massachusetts Lowell. We are a cohort-based program, and we are piloting with our 2019 cohort in July, fingers crossed, the intercultural developmental inventory, which helps reveal implicit bias. And so we are going to have students work on areas based on their individual data. We'll also get program level data, which helps us understand what we need to work on. So we'll see how that goes. We'll report back to you.
We provide an identity inventory that they're going to take at different points in the program as well to look at how they are oriented towards different identities and across identities. It's a really powerful tool. We actually have them do the identity inventory before they do their critical autobiography. We also created something that allows them to list the ways in which they're privileged, as well as the ways in which they've struggled or faced resistance from the middleman white norm. It's really easy for people to write about the ways in which they've been disadvantaged. It's harder for them to think about how they've been privileged. So we make them sort of do that list before they even write their story, so they can at least be thinking about it.
Come behind you.
Hi, Ron Fader, Southern New Hampshire University. Just a question about your decision to have leaders only come into your program in terms of leaders of position and perhaps not teachers.
We do sometimes have teachers, if they come to the table having shown strong teacher leadership and an orientation towards like their goals, their statement of purpose is to move into leadership. But a lot of what we do, they're doing within their context. And so those who look super qualified to us who are teachers, we work hard to understand whether or not they're going to have a context to practice leadership. So we really think that's important for our program, for them to be able to have a context in which to do some of the assignments. So we don't necessarily say no, but if you're coming to us in a sort of teacher leadership way, we're really open to that.
Just as an aside, we also discourage applicants who have as their main objective to be a professor or a researcher, because we're not preparing those individuals. Although ironically, 3 of our graduates are adjuncts in our program.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. I'm Rick McCown from Duquesne University. Thank you for this opportunity, for this consortium to think together about these issues. Tying social justice work to improvement in science is critical. And one of the things we're trying to do is just that in our program at Duquesne. We start with the central law of improvement. Every system is perfectly designed to deliver the results it gets. Our students do an equity audit in one of the courses. They take 2 per semester. In the other course, they're doing an improvement audit of their organizations as well. We're trying to use the improvement tools to, first of all, understand what the results of a perfectly designed system they're working in are, and what the unacceptable results are. In our program, an unacceptable result of a perfectly designed system could become a problem of practice if, and only if, they can demonstrate it as a matter of social justice. So we're really working hard to try to tie together what we call improvement inquiry and matters of social justice. So, Robert, I've got to talk to you about your book. Thank you.
And I want to say about that, I think this is part of Brandy Hinnett Crawford's chapter, who's one of our faculty members as well. We have discovered this relationship between improvement science and social justice that I don't think we anticipated. For example, when you do a causal analysis, I teach a course called Disquisition Proposal Writing this summer, and they will do a fishbone diagram, right, an example of a causal analysis. And they'll say, okay, how come? Maybe their problem, I'm just going to throw it out there, is that all of our third graders are reading below proficiency. So that's the problem I want to address. And when they go to their design team and they say, okay, what are all the potential causes of this problem? Some of the things that come out, well, parents aren't involved in school, and you immediately see this deficit-based ideology coming out of the design team. That is an opportunity right there to say, okay, as a leader, I probably need to reorient this conversation. We need to put this causal analysis aside and start looking at the notion of deficit versus asset-based ideology. Then when we're all on the same page there, we'll go back to our fishbone. And we won't allow ourselves to blame parents and students for the problem. We will only orient ourselves to the organization, right? And so in that way, that becomes very powerful, right? To bring the two together. That wasn't something we expected. You got your causal analysis over here and your equitable outcomes over here. Well, actually, when you go in there, they can come together, which I think is really powerful.
I'm Christina Haskell from the University of Denver, and I have a particular interest in rural education leadership. And I'm wondering, in your space in particular, knowing where you're located, knowing the work that you do, how you've been able to work with your graduates when they do go back into those place-based contexts that are rural, to really help them break, to support the assets and to break through those hegemonic practices that are, in fact, really deeply ingrained.
Christina, happy birthday. Even though it's not today, I think it was a couple days ago. The reality is we're not doing a good job. We're not there yet. And that's our next big question, right? How do we engage with the community in order to support them in that work? Right now, we say things, and it's happening. Their cohort model is a great point of support for them. And they go to each other when they're facing this resistance and this challenge. Whether we've been able to help them, other than the example I gave with our direct involvement with the school system and helping the schools and the students at the same time, I don't think we've figured that out yet. I think we want to do that, and we're talking about ways in which we can do that. We also always hit that resource wall, like, okay, I'm a tenure track faculty, I'm a program director, can we do all this? Can we prepare them here and then find the space to go out to the community and help the community get where it needs to go in order to embrace these students? We want to do that. We want to do that. We have yet to figure it out. And certainly would love to hear from others who feel like they're creating a successful engagement model with their communities that helps their students, the leaders, be successful.
One thing, especially for folks in rural contexts, we have started, and we heard that these folks have been here the longest issues, right? So this is new, but having students delve into understanding those historical context in their own communities and historical trauma that comes with the marginalized communities or the generational poverty in their specific school settings, which helps dive into then the root causes maybe for some of the inequities that then we help perpetuate.
One of the things that we neglected to mention at the beginning is that we have 3 tracks in our program. We have a K-12 track for people who are aspiring to move up the ladder administratively at the elementary, middle, or high school level. We have a community college track for individuals who are administrators or aspiring administrators at the community college level. And we have a 4-year/university track for those who seek to move up the track administratively at the higher education level, at the 4-year college university level. So we have all of these, we have individuals from these three cohorts in the same classes. All of the core courses in leadership and research are blended in a sense. And so there might be a quote-unquote generic text, and then there are additional texts that relate to the specific areas or track that the individuals are involved in.
I see you're ready to move on, but
That's okay.
I have a tangible example. I'm Laura Carafell, I'm a recent doctoral student or graduate from the University in Boca, Florida. And four students, the university brought 4 recent graduates. And here we are, we're first time here at a conference, a CPED convening, I apologize, convening. And now we're in the conversation, and now as we move on, looking forward to the next position in our careers, we've had conversations with other doctors now, and we're part of the conversation, and we have a different viewpoint now being here. And so I think that's one tangible example of how Lynn University, Dr. Lush and Dr. Burleson have kind of supported us in our next steps early on. So.
Okay. We're open to pushback.
She's been a game show host. Making up millions.
So you asked for pushback and she said, oh, and I won't repeat it. Coming from a large urban setting where most of our program, our students are working in one of the 10 or 20 biggest urban settings, when you push back, you lose your job as a principal. So doing what you're asking in a large urban setting where if you don't drink the Kool-Aid, particularly in the state of Florida, you are putting them at risk. So it has to be carefully done. And we have multiple principals, assistant superintendents, with their superintendent's blessing in the room, but at times when it comes to disquisition or dissertation time, that's fine, but we don't want that public. And that happened to a student of ours who had to go outside their setting and do their study because they would not allow it to happen because they didn't want it to be public at the last minute. So I applaud the whole notion of social justice. I'm one of those people. I'm a special educator who pushes all the time for people with disabilities. But at the same time, we have to be cognizant of our partners and the risk that we are setting them up for, potentially, in their jobs. So how do you address that?
And that is a big conversation among us. We're very aware of that is the resistance, right? And we can't just build a capacity to do this work.
Let me address what you were saying. We have in my mind, it's a one-way model. We're training you guys to go do that, what he is saying, to go into the field and be the one crusader. But then there's other projects that, like David Emig is doing with the I-League, where they're actually joining with, districts, where the district and the person that's going out to do that all alone, they actually work together. And so I think that it's in its small initial stage right now, but there'll be other opportunities to use that model and try to distribute that so you're not going in as the one person that's going to risk their neck for this kind of stuff.
I would say that, in some instances, you will be the only person going out. But the solution, I think, comes when there are a bunch of people going out there, and they have to be listened to. And so there are going to be sacrifices along the way, but I don't think we can stand by and allow the situation to continue as it is.
I would say another piece is the value of having practitioners in academic positions who have moved. Having been a longtime practitioner and moved into academia, you go to different conferences and there's the disconnect, right? And there are those who've been in academia for a long time and have many, many public, I'm just gonna share my own biases, right? And some of what I've felt being new in academia. And they feel that they're published and they're renowned. But I question if they actually could lead the schools that I've led. Right? And there's value in having every one of us have been in leadership positions, in chairs, in educational organizations, and in different positions, which adds value to the guidance that we're able to offer our students as we're growing them to be able to, like I said back there, we're not playing 52-card pickup with educational organizations, but is there meaningful change that we can make? Absolutely. And we're from North Carolina. I mean, I know Florida's bad, but we're worse.
I think it's
it can be done. Really. Absolutely.
It's an ongoing competition.
And we can't shy away from it because it may be hard. And
I want to give an example though. So the systemic equity work that we're doing with Asheville City Schools, as of this past summer, 2 additional districts are signing on. And so you start somewhere and then you build. And what I believe is going to happen is, as we create these, with K-12 in particular, this systemic change, and we see the outcomes improve for these students in their communities, that other districts are going to have to listen. They're going to have to listen. But we can't do it overnight, but we have to do it, right? We have to do it, and we're facing resistance, amazing levels of resistance in what we're doing, but we're still moving forward.
The real thing is how do you teach them to be a change agent and navigate that?
Yeah.
And not risk that.
Right.
Pushing it back and forth. And that's the part of certain parts of Florida that is very, very.
I don't think we have the answer to that, but we are trying, I'll be honest with you, to push our leaders, in particular our white leaders, to go beyond conversation. I know of a particular principal who thinks he's a leader for equity and social justice because he has all of these conversations in his school about how you talk to children about racism, what is white privilege, all of that's important. That's the identity work, that's the focus on equity work, but those are conversations. Are you still disproportionately putting kids of color in special education? Are you still, and you go to the system and you see, how many of your kids who are being referred are, So I don't care how much you talk about yourself and talk about these issues and have this theoretical understanding of what's going on. How are you changing the practices in your organization, right? And that's what we're just trying to move them to that place.
Vivian Johnson from Hamlin University. I am neuroatypical, I always put that out there. And I think about the language that's been used of crusader. And I am quite frankly uncomfortable with that. And I like the language of change agents and building capacity. What about leaders who go in and are looking for allies to help them actually implement? Because in my experience, being the crusader cannot necessarily get you the results you want. You can burn out, you can leave, or you just turn off. And if you don't empower the community where you are, what happens when you eventually leave? Crusaders are great and that attitude is great, but I really firmly believe that if you can't empower the people in the community, the change is not going to be sustained.
Absolutely. All right, Robert, can you, anyone have anything else they want to add that they're really on their mind before we go to the very last piece?
Thanks, I'm Ted Holland from UNL. I want to return just briefly to the disrupt the status quo language that we were using before. And I think an important point to remember about the status quo is it's a balance point between things that are moving forward and things that are moving backward. And as we think about how we prepare EdD students to engage out in the field, and often they're already out in the field, sometimes it's literally as blunt as sort of calling out something that's going wrong, sort of pushing back and challenging. But oftentimes it's giving a louder voice to something that's going right. And what we're trying to do is tip the balance so that the new status quo is in a little bit of a different place than the old status quo was. The new status quo is more just. And I think it's important that we pay attention to the fact that there's often really good stories going on. And it's a really exciting third grade teacher, or it's a really good school in a kind of mediocre district. And if you help that strong school become more of the norm, that district gets better, right? So part of the work is helping our students identify when there's the favorable story to tell and help tell that.
And I completely agree with that. I'll push a little and say that we're really good in K-12 as all organizations as educators to say, look at what we do great. We have to sell ourselves. We have to market ourselves. Especially now, like in K-12, we have to keep students, we have to get students, because now we're in a competitive market, right? But oftentimes, and I think it's awful politically, how we're having to defend the quality of public schools, for example, right? I mean, there's a lot of great work going on in there. But in our desire to do that and to put that narrative out there, make sure it's understood what we're doing, we're also sometimes not honest about the role we're playing. So we have to do both. We have to be transparent and honest about how we're continuing to perpetuate these inequities. At the same time, here's work that we are doing well, right? It's a balance. It can't be one or the other. And I've seen schools that you look at them on the veneer, their veneer is beautiful. You go down deep, do an equity audit or like something similar to that, and you start to think maybe not, right?
All right. You did a great job of being engaged for 2 hours. I commend you. I mean, I can't sit still for 2 hours. You did a great job. But going back to what Dr. Perry said about it takes the village to do this. No one can do it by themselves. It takes every one of us in the room to do it. We work hard, we play hard. You know that, you know me. We really do, we deserve it. As you can see, there's a question mark up there. This is a cheap plug from me. I'm chairing a search committee for an assistant professor of ed research. If you would like to join this fabulous team, please apply. Yeah, all right. Well, and I'll let you.
Well, there's more to it. We want you to be a part of this family. We are recruiting in CPED because we want somebody who believes in the CPED principles and who feels like a program like this is a good fit. So please consider. And Asheville, North Carolina, let me tell you.